Hello, I'm Dr. James Bogash, expert in health and longevity, and today we're going to talk about COVID again, like most people have talked about. I know that the rest of the world, or many people out in the street, COVID's pretty much dead, but you'd be surprised how many people want to keep this issue alive. But one of the things that was said early on is that New Zealand, look at New Zealand, they're being awesome, and look at their numbers. It's a freaking island. It never counted, because you could lock yourself away and certainly keep most cases down, but ultimately, at some point, unless you want to completely destroy your economy and the people and their mental health, then you have to open up at some point. And so I've always said that New Zealand doesn't count. Australia, to a certain degree, you can lock Australia down. To a certain degree, it's bigger, but it's still an island. Hawaii was much the same. So I've always said we need to kind of wait and see what ends up happening. And certainly New Zealand, their numbers are not looking terribly great. And there is some question about why this is happening. So if you look at Our World in Data for COVID, which is one of my favorite sites to look at data, you can see that beginning the mid to end of February, their cases started spiking. Now granted, it's a smaller country, so when you say spiking, the raw numbers are not that big. And deaths went up along with that. So the thought was, well, gosh, we could just wait until everybody's got vaccinated and boosted, and then we can open up the country safely. But they also began their booster program in mid-January, really started seeing a spike in the number of people who were boosted. Kind of correlates with this increase in COVID cases. You're like, well, they started letting tourists in. Well, yeah, in May. So that's not a good excuse for this. Just all of a sudden we started seeing cases, deaths increasing right around the same time boosters did. And all-cause mortalities going up. That could just be a result of increased COVID cases and deaths, but those numbers don't exactly correlate. There is a gentleman, economist, that put together an all-cause mortality associated with boosters. There's been some controversy in it, but the reality is, these are numbers that we need to look at and ask some really hard questions that maybe we don't really want the answers to. And medicine has not been very good. Certainly public health here in the United States has really pretty much sucked. And so we're looking at people like economists and mathematicians that are looking at the data. You could argue they have less skin in the game, if you will. They have everything to do with looking at just the data and taking an emotional context out of that. So it's really interesting when we see some of the data coming out and studies published from mathematicians and economists that are different viewpoints than what we might get out of medicine. That's really pretty much it that I have to say on this. Their story is not yet over. Clearly their economy and the mental health of the people in the country, we have to ask if those 2 years were worth it, if when they finally open up they just have the same experience that everybody else did, and arguably maybe even worse because of the potential for the boosters to actually start to decrease immune function and increase COVID numbers, case hospitalizations, and deaths. Again, not an answer that we want to look for. We've been dancing around it, and yet there's accumulating data across the globe. New Zealand is just one of many. As always, I'll post a link to this particular review by The Economist in the description. Make sure you like this video, share it with somebody who you think needs the information, and subscribe to the channel.